Thank you, Brett. So recording is now in progress. So good morning, everyone. As I said, the link to today's meeting agenda is posted to the chat, and you can access it if you want a better visualization than what I'm going to share a little bit later. So I'm Stephen Chu from the Digital Health Agency. I'm chairing today's meeting. Brett, do we have a scriber?
I'll do it. That's fine.
Okay, thank you. So we now have a scriber. So what we'll do is we definitely have a quorum for today's meeting, although probably it would be better to have a broader representation than what we have, but that's sufficient for us to get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm sharing my screen. So hopefully everyone is able to see my screen. So on the page here is the draft agenda. So what I will do is I will, if I conference cooperate, yep. So here is the draft agenda on the screen that you'll be able to see. We have 10 items to process through today. Brett, I have an apology from Richard, who is down for item number 5 today. Brisbane office is running a fire drill, so he's sort of out of the office and probably unable to join us,
Okay.
sort of unless the fire drill finishes early. So we might, if he doesn't come back early enough, we might have to table this one for the next meeting.
All right.
Okay, so the first order of business is looking at the draft agenda. Do we have any changes apart from what I've mentioned that there's a potential change to item number 5? Anything else that we want to change or add to the draft agenda?
Stephen, it's Michael
Yep.
here. 3 and 4, I'm just going to combine all that into an eRequesting publication review. So
Okay.
3 and 4 will just combine.
All right, so we'll deal with 3 and 4 together once we come to that, which will be pretty soon. All right, anyone who needs to have the agenda item rearranged because they have time constraint? All right, hearing none, then we need to then we'll accept the draft agenda as is. So we then look into the first order of business, which is the approval of the minutes of the previous 3 meetings. So I will put the links to the previous meetings minutes. So that's the first one, which is December the 17th last year. And this is the next one. And then the last one that we have here. So Danielle, you have your hand up?
I don't think I do. Do I?
Oh, sorry, Lucy.
I do. I do. Sorry.
Yep.
I put this in the chat. I just wanted to know that 28th of January and 17th of December 2025 minutes are missing list of attendees. So maybe we can do a conditional approval.
I'm on
today.
Yep.
All right. Okay. So there are attendance sort of like at least missing from those sort of meeting minutes. So are we comfortable enough to approve the content while we are waiting for the attendance to be added to the meeting minutes? or we want to defer it until the next conference call?
I think they're
Oh.
okay. Given
Yeah.
it's carried over a
Yeah.
few weeks now.
All right.
I'll locate those. I'll add those attendees. Sorry for not getting those in.
Okay, great. So if we don't have any concern about approving the meeting minutes, while Brett will have an action item to locate the attendance and also to populate the attendance lists onto those sort of meeting minutes, then we can do we want to, I mean, I saw that Brett has sent out an email that circulated the draft meeting minutes. So do we want to sort of go through them one by one, or are we happy that people have reviewed the draft meeting minutes as they are? Any preference? All right, hearing no preferences, I would assume that we are happy to approve those three meeting minutes sort of as presented. So can I have a mover or someone motion to accept all three of them?
I will move that, Brett.
Okay, thanks, Brett. Can I have a seconder? I think we have new messages. Yeah, Daniel said that she won't vote. That will be fine.
I'm
I'm
happy
waiting
to
for.
second that.
All right, thank you, Michael. So we have Brett moving to accept those three draft meeting minutes, and then Michael Wilson second that motion. All right, and these are sort of like non-substantial type of votes, so I don't think that we need to apportionate as to how many from Cyro can vote. On this one, we're happy to have everyone voting unless there are objections. So if there are no objections, Brett, can you help launch the e-vote?
Sure.
Thank you. All right, the votes has come up. How many do we have as participants?
We've got eight possible.
Right, I think we do have met the required numbers. We have 4 affirmative, 2 abstain, and not counting me as a chair. All right, okay, the number has gone up, so we definitely have met the required number to approve those meeting minutes. All right, so I'll end the poll here.
Do you have 602? Is that the final?
No, we have 502.
I'm
Not
a plus one.
include.
I'm
Yeah.
plus one. Yeah.
Oh, you are the +1. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Then we have.
Cool.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see the +1 in the chat. All right, so we have the final approval. So I've noticed that Andy have just joined us. So Andy, you have joined us in time for the meaty part of the agenda discussions.
Woohoo!
Indeed. All right, item number 2, updates and news. Brett, over to you.
All right. So updates. So we've got ballot running. So signups finish on the 13th of February, which is very soon. So yeah, better get onto that if you haven't signed up already. We have AU core and AU base balloting. AU patient summary rather balloting for R1 working group, and that is probably about that. I think we've gone through this a number of times. Danielle's asking for numbers. If you bear with me for a second, I'll tell you exactly. So overall, we have 44 people signed up, and they are signed up for both ballots. So same 44 people.
So from organizational wise, Brett, do we have a
Yep.
good spread?
We've got 9 different organizations represented and 8 individuals.
Okay, pretty good then.
Yeah, but I think there'll be some more correspondence going out generally to the members, but I might also ping all the work group channels just to make sure people know it's closing up soon.
Yeah, just also to note that people, those who haven't signed up or missed the sign up deadline, you can still put in change request comments, but then they won't be counted towards the ballot request.
Yep. Very.
All right.
Oh yes, Muffin. Go on.
So the check-in on action. So that's the next one.
Yeah, I believe that actions from last meeting were done. So there is an entry now that's clearly indicating how to sign up or be removed from the FHIR Work Group list. Yeah, so that's on our front page of the work group page. It actually was there already, but I made it a bit more obvious as to what it is. And I think too, there was an item on Richard to set up a Zulip channel to discuss the data type identifiers and NOI, and I believe that was also started on the chat. So I believe they're done.
Yeah, that's done. I'll pop it in the chat so that people can contribute to that. I also think that we would advertise that in core and in the AU core, because it did get discussed, I think, at the last AU core call as being relevant potentially. And it's a shame Richard's not here today, but what he was talking to me about was saying, because I think we talked in our last call about having a breakout on identifiers, and I thought that everyone seemed to go, yeah, that was pretty good. Richard did say to me that he would be happy to have a breakout at the Connectathon and organize that because he's going to be there. So that's possible. Is there, in terms of like scheduling breakouts, because that one would be related to AU Base and the FHIR Work Group.
Yep.
Are we going to do a call out for any others or topics? Do we want to talk about that instead of what is topic 5? Or
I've actually, I've got that in topic 9. I've got those questions.
oh, okay, cool. Then let's leave it to that.
Yeah, cool. That's good though. That's well.
All right.
We can make
cool. So that wrap up that sort of bullet point number 2 in under agenda item 2. So the next one is the next call, which is on February the 25th, which clashes with the face-to-face meeting event in Hobart. So we need to discuss about whether or not it needs to be moved. Or keep as is, or cancel it.
Stephen, just
Yep.
noting the one after that conflicts with the Connectathon as well, I think. So the next 2 have conflicts.
Oh no,
Right.
that sort of, yeah. Can you bring up the calendar, Stephen?
Okay, so hang on, where is the link to? Can you
If
can
you're
you put
logged
it?
in and you are, just keep scrolling up a bit on the left.
Yep.
And then you'll see calendars.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
click on that. So, I mean, the easy one is to address what Michael Wilson said, which I think we were going to talk about at the end, but let's do it now. How there's a FHIR Work Group call that gets that on the Connectathon day, that actually goes to the 10th. So there's an AU FHIR Work Group meeting on the 10th. So that one's already
So that one
moving
is
there.
on March.
Yeah, March.
Yep.
Yeah, so the March 11th meeting won't happen. It'll happen on the 10th. For the one back in February, it's so I think that one of the questions is how much work do we have that we want to do? The concern is if we don't move the next call, we would be going essentially 4 weeks without an AU FHIR Work Group call, and I don't know if that actually is a good idea.
Does it have any impact on the ballot content deadline? I don't think so, but I just want
No,
to
that's
be
today's
clear.
call.
Yep.
Any content that would be going in would need to be AFMM1, and I know we've got a topic to talk about whether or not
Yep.
AU base can go to ballot. That's today's call where that has to be done. Because the ballot publication is on the 16th. You can see there's the yellow warning to all the ID authors to get that
Yep.
done there. And the FHIR Work Group call, even if we moved it back a week onto the 18th, is past that.
Right. So, given what you have said, that if we cancel this one, then we will be sort of 4 weeks without a call. So I think then the preference is either to move it forward or to push it out. So what are the thoughts?
Yeah, I would really like to have one either on the 18th or the 4th, particularly since we're not going to get some of the content that I think Richard had to walk through today. I think that we would want to have that prior to coming into the Connectathon.
So is there a preference on the 18th, for the 18th or the 4th of March? Any particular preference? Anything that would logistically affect sort of our decisions on a preference for 18th or the 4th?
Well,
I'm just
kickoff.
gonna look at my calendar.
Yeah. Because does it? I mean, if we make it the 4th, it gives Richard more time, but it's also we'll have already had our kickoffs, but although that's AU-based content anyway, so it's not
Yeah,
such a big deal.
I agree with
Yeah.
Ruben, +1. I would go earlier because Richard already had content to present, and so that will give him enough time to present it. We can talk through it, and then like the chance of maybe incorporating some changes we could see at the Connectathon. I think it's really squishy if we try to just put it on the 4th, like really tight.
Cool.
Right. Then for this one, then I will move it to the 18th of Feb, which
Yeah.
is next week.
Yeah. It might even be a shorter one. But I think we've got content to walk through, so we should try to make space for it.
All right. Okay. Then in that case, then do we need to vote on it, or can if we don't have anyone who has expressed concern right now, we can move it to the 18th. We decide here, and then will be for the co-chairs to send out an email notifications to the members about the change. Are we comfortable with this that I've suggested? All right, not hearing anything in response, so I will assume silent is assent. So we'll move the 25th meeting to the 18th. All right, and one of the co-chairs, Brett, can you action on that? Send out a notice to the members.
Yeah, I'll put it on
Thank
me.
you. All right, then all done then. Okay, so that's that done. So Michael, you have asked that we wrote 3 and 4 into one. So it's over to you now. I'll stop sharing, and then
my screen.
you can drive the conversation.
Yep, I'll share my screen. Just give me a sec. Try that one. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay. So today I just want to go through a review for publication of eRequesting Release 1. We've got a publication branch, we're ready to go. There's a couple of things we just need to have a look at today in the FHIR Work Group. And I'm just going to provide a quick overview of Release 1, just so you've got the context for anyone who's watching this afterwards. So just noting that we have HL7 Australia eRequesting FHIR project. This has been established and we've got, I'm not going to go through all the details of this, but we've got a current project scope statement for release 1 of eRequesting. And the primary thing there is that we have for this release limited it to pathology and medical imaging requests in community-based care provision, while also considering it for future use beyond this scope. But that's been the context for release 1 that we have an approved project scope statement for. A bit of an overview of timeline of where we've been. So we started way back in January 2024. We had a ballot for comment in that year, and then through 25, we finished the resolution of that ballot for comment. We did some further development, then we went into the ballot for working standard in the second half of last year, and we've completed that, and now we're looking ready for publication now here in February 2026. So during that time, we've had a number of Connectathons and testing events. Probably the next slide might summarize that a bit better. So during that time, we've had, I think, 59 Zoom calls, 4 face-to-face meetings, averaged about 42 attendees over all those meetings over those couple of years. We've had a Spark testing event, we've had 5 HL7 Australia Connectathons, and we've been through a ballot for comment and a ballot for working standard. We've got some stats here as well around sort of breakdown of members. Obviously, we don't have 650 people coming to our meetings, but of all the people that have signed up with an interest in eRequesting, this is kind of the breakdown of the sort of membership classes. Publication history. So we've done a number of previews that were to support Connectathons and testing events. And we've got our ballot for comment, as well as our ballot for working standard snapshots there. And we did that last preview, the 100 preview was for the December Connectathon last year as well, which had pretty much all the resolutions from ballot for working standard in it. So we're able to look at those and test those. Summary of the ballot. I mean, we've completed and applied all the resolutions here, but as far as votes go, we ended up with 42 affirmative and 3 negative. So that gave us a pass of 93%. So well above the 60% that we needed. Also got a bit of a summary here of all the issues that were resolved during the ballot for working standard reconciliation. So we only had 99 ballot issues, but we resolved more than just the ballot issues, things that were brought up during that reconciliation period. Just to give you a sort of indication of the change here, 27% were non-substantive change requests and 33% were technical corrections. Then we had 7% on 9 substantive changes. We had some duplicates, quite a few that were non-persuasive, 19% there, and 12% that were deferred. So there wasn't a lot of sort of informative changes there and sort of technical corrections, but not a lot of other changes really. This is a summary of what we have now in release 1. So we've got 4 actors and we've got 4 capability statements to go with those actors. We've got some abstract profiles that form the base of some of our resource profiles. We've got a number of obligation profiles there. So those obligation profiles are AU core profiles that have just had obligations for eRequesting actors applied to them. And then we've got our resource profiles, which is the core of eRequesting there. So we've got 11 of those. We have 7 value sets, the support terminology, and 2 extensions. Moving on to our dependencies. So we've got dependencies here on AU Base, AU Core, and IPS, as well as SNOMED CT. And we've got references there to eRec DI version 1 is what we were basing this on. So as far as publication, we're looking to publish now. We've got our publication branch ready to go. So this is our checklist for getting through publication and FHIR Work Group reviews. So we've got our project proposal that's approved. That's in the HL7 Australia Project Registry. We've got our project scope statement approved. It's also noted in the project registry. We did a notice of intent to ballot for our working standard. So that was approved during the FHIR Work Group meeting on the 2nd of, what was that, July? We approved AFMM levels, so all the AU requesting artifacts are at AFMM 1, and so they were approved through a couple of FHIR Work Group meetings. We had our variance statement approved as part of our notice of intent to ballot there, and there's just 2 things to do today to finalise this for publication. One, we'll just have another look at the variance statement just to check it's fine for publication, and we'll go through our QA HTML in the release branch. Before I move on to these, are there any questions on any of that summary getting to here? No. Okay, I'll move forward. So the variance statement, we'll just have a look at that. This has not changed since the ballot for working standard. So it's the same one that has been looked at by the FHIR Work Group before. Put it in the chat, on my chat window. Okay. Yeah. Okay, put it in the chat. So noting this, that we're stating that we have no variance from AU Base, that we're fully compliant with version 6. What we have done is we've additionally profiled some resources. So some of these things that are not in AU Base. So we've got a number of communication request profiles. We've got a consent profile, document reference profile, some task profiles, and 2 extensions, display sequence and fasting precondition. As far as variance from AU Core, we're again saying we have no variance from AU Core. We're compliant with version 2, the published one. Again, we have profiled some additional resources, including communication request, consent, coverage, document reference, service request, task, and the extensions we noted before. So, like I said, this hasn't changed since the last one. We still believe that we are fully compliant with both AU Base and AU Core. I'm not sure, do I need to motion that we accept this? Happy to do that if that's what we need to do to progress to publication.
I believe
Sorry,
you
go ahead.
mentioned that the FHIR Work Group has cited it, and I guess first you call for if there are any concerns.
Maybe I'll ask, are there any
more
objections or
information?
concerns about this variance statement we're requesting?
I think it's correct, but I think next time, and I might raise a tiny little thing on that, I don't think you need to call out extensions that aren't in core, because it's part of core's official position that it doesn't define extensions, that base does. So I reckon it's totally correct that it's in there. So I'm not asking for any change. I'm quite happy with it. That I think we don't need to do that for, like, every downstream specification doesn't need to include extensions underneath the variance to AU core bit.
Yeah, okay.
So that's just a note from me, but it is like objectively correct what is there.
Is that go for all the other profiles as well, or just extensions?
No, just extensions. Profiles of resources are within the remit of core. Some of these will probably come in, like document reference has been talked about, service like the majority of the resource profiles here are in the backlog for core. It's just that core doesn't define new extensions. That goes in base. So that's, I think, the only difference.
Yep. Okay. Well, I'll note that there are no objections, and there's just that note that you've made on that variance statement. Okay,
Right.
so yeah, I think the requirement then was just for it to be cited. We have done that. We're happy. Moving on to QA report review. So we've got a number of new that we'll have a look at now today. These went through the eRequesting TDG in the last meeting 2 weeks ago. So we've got 1 new error, 1 new warning, and 4 new information messages. The others were previously accepted. They've been previously accepted as we did AFMM reviews. So I've just noted that there. I've got a slide to summarize the new ones. We can go into the QA report if we need to, but we might just go through it on the slide to start with. So the first error, this is one that we do have. There's currently a Zulip chat on this one, which I will find. Wow, I have way too many windows open. There we go.
Yeah, those all look about right to me. I know
Yeah.
I'm just cutting in ahead of that, but I was just reading through because it was interesting that you've got the IPS one. That's
Yeah,
new.
I will get to that.
Yeah, but no, all of that looks, I mean, the majority of those aren't unique to eRequesting.
Yeah,
Almost
that's right.
all of
These are
those
ones, yeah,
are in
respecting
all
the
the
FHIR
other.
Work Group scene.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, that first one, we've got the Zulp chat on that about it's a known publisher issue that's not going to be resolved anytime soon, but there is a link to that there. The second one's the information is just about the FHIR Standard Extension Pack future versions and current depreciations. So again, that's one that's been seen in others. The IPS one, so we do reference IPS and it's inherited from IPS that there is a trial use value set within IPS for pregnancy status. So that's an information message on that one. The next one's about the obligation extension, which we are seeing everywhere. So that one's there. And then moving on, we've got another information message about referencing code systems that are published as draft or experimental. So these are all things. We've got task code, request status, task status, and then the ABS one as well. And then the last one is the warning, which there's a whole heap more than this. There's not just 3 on that. There's a whole heap. We just got a couple of extra ones. We've already actually reviewed that for eRequesting, but a couple of extra ones dropped in for some of the ones, but they're all the same issue, which is about the pinning version, which again, we've been across through other IGs and talked about in FHIR Work Group before. Are there any questions or concerns about any of those? Has anything stood out for anyone that we hadn't talked about?
No, I expected all of those.
Okay. Well, I'd like to motion that we accept these messages in the eRequesting IG and that it's acceptable for publication.
All right, so we have a motion on the table made by Michael Wilson. Do we have a seconder?
I'm happy to second, Jai.
Thank you, Jai, for seconding the motion. All right. Any questions or further discussions on what we have just heard before we go into the e-voting? I've noticed that we have a number of people who just joined sort of new, and if you are not comfortable to vote because you haven't heard everything, then we can entertain an abstain motion, abstain vote. But before that, any questions from those who come in a little bit late? All right, hearing none, then Brett, can you please launch the vote on that? All right, the vote is on. So currently we have 17 participants who have joined our call, and 17 minus 1, which is me. That means we have 16 who would be voting. All right, we have 10 affirmative and 5 abstain and 0 negative. The motion actually carries.
I'm +1, Stephen, so it'll be
sorry, +1. That will be 16.
11.
Yeah, there will be 11 plus 5 and 0 abstain.
Cool.
So, all right, the motion is carried. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank
Michael?
you. Yep.
All right.
So that completes our reviews for R1 publication of eRequesting. So I'm going to finalize a publication request straight after this meeting and submit it to the publication manager. So we'll look to get release 1 of eRequesting done. Very
Well done,
exciting.
Right, thank you.
Sorry,
Yep.
just I'll just note I'll provide this presentation for the minutes. So there's a set of links and the like here that are in this as well. So I'll provide that for the minutes.
That'll be great. Thank you, Michael. Anything else from you, Michael?
No, that's it. That completes my.
All right, thanks. Anyone else who have questions for Michael before we move on to the next agenda item? All right, not hearing anything. Let's move to the next agenda item. Richard, I've seen that you have come back from the fire drill and join us. Are you ready to take agenda item number 5, or do you still prefer for it to be deferred?
No, I think I can talk to it now.
Okay.
I'm just getting my head together, but rather than reorganizing things. Okay, so hang on just a moment. Damn. There we go. Okay, I'm just finding the right page for me to see the minutes. Okay, HSP-O and HAE, I think they were mentioned before. Okay, so there are a bunch of identifiers issued by the government, by the Commonwealth Government. Now, as part of the health identifier system, there are a couple of identifiers which haven't been used up to now, but there's now plans to start using them. Department of Health plans to start issuing them in the near future. The HSP-O and the HAEs. The Health Connect provider, the Health Connect program, as one of its early pieces of work, is doing a thing called provider directory. And one of the ideas is that the provider directory will support for not just the existing identifiers that are in use, like HIPPIs and HIPPOs and Medicare cards and so on. It will also provide for support for organisations with HSP-Os. There's no plans as yet for it to provide support for HAEs, but that means that this piece of work, the provider directory, wants to have the identifier defined in a way that it can be used nicely in FHIR specifications, which basically turns upon having a structure definition as part of HL7AU base, which includes the identifier, its namespace, which is its value for system, and given our current approaches to identifiers, it should have a value for identifier type. The current approach to identifiers in HL7 Australia is that identifiers should have a value, will have a value for type, which is useful to identify what the identifier is about. And let me think. Okay, so
sorry,
that's
Richard,
sort of the
just
background.
sorry for
Yep.
Richard, sorry for interjecting. Are you sharing screen, or do you need to share screen?
I'm not sharing a screen yet.
Okay.
I perhaps should have. I was just sort of trying to give the background. Okay, so as part of this, I should probably start sharing a screen, which will make it easier for people to focus on something. Let me choose one of these windows. I think that one. Is that the one? No, that's not the wrong. That's the wrong one. Where do I stop share? No. How do I stop sharing? Share? Stop share. There we go. Share. Pop, 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 pop. Screen 1, screen 2, screen 2. That one. I think that's the one I want to share. Share. Okay, yes, okay. There we go. So this is the window I wanted to share. Sorry for that. Okay, so here we've got item 5, which is we've got to. So there's the two identifier types, HSP-O and HAE. Question: is this big enough for people? Can people actually read that?
Yes.
Okay, right. So I've created profiles for these, which are at a maturity level 0, and they're available in the build.fire on a branch, one for HSP-O, one for HAE, which have current ideas on what these things should look like. I brought them to an earlier work group meeting that had advice on changes to make to those. I've followed up on the advice on the changes to make, and the progress on that has been to improve the description, improve the references that they point off to where you can find more information about it, to make some small changes to the example. In terms of the outstanding issues are the fact that we need to determine whether NOI is the appropriate type value to use here. And if that is the appropriate type value, then there'll be changes to AU core. Where to next? As part of okay, first of all, next, any questions? Is stuff I should explain more, directions I should run in? Are there any comments or questions on where I've got to now?
I think I have a comment that, I mean, we did approve the drafts shown with a couple of special amendments to go into base. I think that's what you're in progress on now. So it's not yet at draft 0 in AU base.
That's right. They're still in branches. So there's a couple of branches awaiting approval to merge the branches into AU base.
Do you mean PRs? Have you
Yes, yeah.
submitted pull requests? Okay.
I have not yet submitted pull requests. What I've done is I've created the branches, and I was thinking that I should talk to this work group before submitting the pull requests. Would that be appropriate, or would it have made more sense to have submitted the pull requests before talking to this work group?
Oh, I don't think it matters either way. I think
Fine.
the original content we approve is approved.
Yep.
And I think if you've got new things that you'd like additional content for us that we can approve today, then absolutely we can go through that.
Okay. I've responded to the request for changes in these branches. So I guess I could see whether these things satisfy those changes. I remember Andy wanted a better understanding of what HSP-O and HAE were, and the best way that I could find to actually give that was to say, well, to actually understand these things, you've actually got to go and read the legislation. So this thing now points off to there's a statement by the Department of Health on the healthcare identifier FAQ, and then there's the Act, and those two are in fact the best existing guidance for what these identifiers do and what they are.
It'd be useful to have like a TLDR if you're too lazy to
Right.
to.
This is the TLDR.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. An HSP-O is assigned under the HI service to an organisation that does not directly provide healthcare services, but provides care and support services, such as in-home care support and personal care services. And that's the 2LD. That is the TLDR.
Maybe put that at the top of the description, and then underneath the references to, if you need more, then all those references to acts and stuff.
But that text looks pretty good.
Look, yeah. This is what we do for HIPPOs, right? So it's just basically, this identifier provides blah, blah. Okay, a HIPPO is okay, there's the reference. This has got the reference there, and then it's got a HIPPO, and there's the description. And that's exactly the format that I've changed here. Oh, sorry, that's I've followed that exact format here. Now, maybe this has got enough extra words that we should change the format, but it is following the format that we do for every other identifier.
You change every other identifier then?
Look, this is the work group. This is the work group that can make that demand, but yes.
I think you've done the right thing, Richard. It's the pity it was done that way in the first place.
Yeah. Now, yes, it would be nice to point to a single thing, but in this unfortunate case, there is no single thing. So if you go and look at this, the Department of Health thing, they're going to have to update it. If you look at the Acts, it's fine. If you look at the agencies page, we're going to have to update that. So that's why it's got this particular thing, because that's the information that's available now.
All right, Richard, there are some chats there in the chat boxes. One is from Paul Main. He is asking how do these relate to HPIOs?
I think you've kind of touched on that there, Richard. So these are instead of HPIOs for different organisations that don't directly provide care. Is that?
That's right. That's right. To get an HPIO, basically you have to be an organisation that in the normal course of business employs people who are eligible to get an HPII. That's not how it's worded, but that's basically the extent of people in the real world, the extent of organisations and people that it applies to.
So if you typically employ the organisation. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
That's right. Yeah. If you typically employ people with HIPPIs, you can get a HIPPO. If you don't typically employ people with HIPPIs to do your work, so if you typically provide things like cleaning services or something like that, Now, or if you provide care of a sort where the people would not be eligible to get HIPPIs, then you're not eligible to get a HIPPO the way the legislation is written. So the legislation includes a thing saying, oh, we've got a different sort of identifier for those organisations that work in the healthcare system and need to be able to work with identifiers, but do not employ people with HIPPIs and so are not eligible for HIPPOs. And here it is. It's an HSP-O.
Yep. It's very reminiscent, Brett and Andy, of the discussions we had at the NSMN around using NASH certificates and how exclusionary they would be for the network.
Yeah. I've just noticed a update which hasn't made its way through here. That word should be health.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Hang on. I'm confusing myself. Yeah.
Because these don't relate to a healthcare service.
Yeah. Hang on. Look, one of these two, I've got to make a change because one of them has got health. One of HAE and HSP-O has the word health. No, it's this one. This one's the one that I need to change. We're not talking about this one. This is fine. I'm pretty sure it is healthcare is the appropriate word there in the legislation. Yeah. Sorry for that distraction. Yeah. So basically, the reason for these is that this is the way the legislation was written, and health is going to Health and Services Australia and the agency running through the process to have these things being issued sometime soon. But I'm not sure how soon is, but I expect it'll be this year. It may be this financial year, but I'm not part of that process, so I don't know how soon.
All right. Any further discussions before we look at next step? All right. It seems that we don't have any more questions or further discussions. So, Richard and Daniel, next step.
I think the next steps are largely the same, although one of those is, I guess, ticked off around the additional material coming available about its use. I did, Richard, when you weren't here, I did post in the chat the Zulip post that you popped out, I think yesterday or the day before.
Yep.
And said also that I'll email that round to the AU core group to contribute to.
Yep. Yeah. I put two things into Zulip. One was just way too long, and this is the short one, which is relevant. One of the things is that at the moment, HSP-O, we're talking about using the identifier NOI as the identifier type so that it's in the same, so it's got the same value for identifier type as HIPPOs. But one of the things with that is, well, should it be that? Should it have a different one? The advice that I've received is, and the advice that we've received is that NOI is appropriate because it's the same sort of thing as HPIOs. There'll be some work to do falling out of that. But one of the questions that then came up was, well, do we actually use these identifier types? And that's the point behind this particular thing. Do people actually use identifier type? Is it a useful, valuable thing? Is it an unreasonable impost? And how do people use it? And so that's the point of this thing here. I expect the conversations I've had, it seems that people probably do use it. They probably use it for things like labeling things on screens, for constructing HL7v2 messages, and for a range of other such things. But it would be nice to know what people actually do use it for and how people are planning to use it in the near future.
In some things, it's the only way you can determine, like a DVA, if you want to go between the colors, not saying that it's common, but there's no way of doing it but by the type, isn't there?
That's my assumption too.
I think if you know the DVA code space well enough, you can probably derive it from looking in the codes. But who wants to do that if you've got a type to do it? Yeah. So that it's certainly used to do that. It may not be the only way, but it's certainly used to do that.
It's also
Yeah,
used. It's also useful where you've got a whole lot of identifiers and you're looking for medical record numbers. You can filter by all the MR ones.
Right. Anyway, so
Yeah.
can people sort of start writing on this Zulip page stuff about how they actually use them? And
Can you drop a link to that in chat?
Yeah.
So I think summarizing the actions were, and sorry, Richard, I did share our conversation where you had said that you would be interested in running a breakout on this in the Connectathon. Is that still a goer?
Yes, that's still a goer. It still looks like I'll be going to the Connectathon, so I'll be able to run a breakout.
All right, let's look at the sort of breakout discussions in the sort of agenda item number 8. Danielle, let's sort of wrap this one up and then look at the next action.
So I think the next steps that are left are the proposals, like the options around what to do with NOI. I think everyone comes to a position that something has to change. Whether that is a clarification on what NOI means, whether that's using a different code, whether that's whatever. I think the action we've had since we've been talking about this has been we need a proposal on the use and appropriateness of that code. And then there's a number of actions like breakouts and the Zulip thing that are going to inform that proposal. Brett?
I actually put a ticket in for eBase, which hasn't been triaged yet, about the meaning of NOI.
Oh, good.
But obviously having a discussion is good. Let's do that.
And then potentially even a resulting change to the next release of AU Core, depending on where we go with this. So I think that's what's outstanding off the original list of things that we wanted to clarify, besides the usual editorial stuff, I don't know. I think there needs to be I think we agreed there would be a stew note or a call out or something about that. But that's all editorial, and I assume you and Brett are sorting that out as it comes into base.
So, Brett, can we capture those action items and then assign persons who needs to action against them? So, how many of them are here that we need to capture the action items?
Can we go through a list?
We might have to consolidate them at a last minute. So I've just sort of noticed that it's in the minutes themselves, but not everything made it to the action widget. So I think we just need to go through the minutes, the thing around the stew note, the bit around NOI. We can tick off the one or double check with Andy and I think a couple of the other people that the additional description is sufficient at this level to provide some context for the use. I think there's a couple of others that were also really minor. There was the one around the invariance and putting in a prefix for 1100, and there were just a few actions. I think let's just come up with a consolidated list and then we can tick off the ones that are done.
All right.
Are they
in the interest of time,
are they in the minutes though from the last meeting? There's some of those.
They're certainly in the body of the minutes. They're just not listed as action items, like the bit around the invariance on prefixes, the bit around
In the motion,
proposals.
though, isn't it?
Yes, but that's not helping us at the moment. I think what we're trying to do is get a discrete list so we can know where we are instead of reading all the minutes.
So in the interest of time, I would suggest that we take this as an offline action item that the co-chairs come up with a list and then work it with Andy and also Richard, and any other relevant or interested parties to assign actors to the actions. Would that be all right?
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I think that's the easiest way to track it is to just out of this meeting, put them as an action item list so that we can move through it.
Okay, so Daniel, you are taking up this sort of offline coordination action.
I will email people and ask them to do things. Are you
Okay,
sure?
cool. All right. So that done. All right. We have only about 25 minutes left for the call. So are we able to wrap up by the action number 5? All right, it looks like that we should be able to. All right, now action number 6. Sorry, agenda item number 6. AU base 6.1 ballot readiness. Brett.
Okay, so 6.1 ballot at this stage has no FMM1 content to add to ballot on. So therefore, I will motion that we cancel this ballot.
So the motion from Brett is that we cancel AU base 6.1 ballot ballot going to go ahead in February, March. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
What a question. What are the chances that? Oh no, that's fine. I talked to Brett about that. Sorry. Yep. Pretend I didn't talk.
Sorry. Michael Osborne just remind me of me not sharing the screen, so I'm sharing the screen now. So that's agenda item number 6.1. All right. So anyone has any further questions so Brett, I beg your pardon, it's a point of order. So Brett has a motion on the table to cancel AU base 6.1 for the upcoming ballot cycle. Daniel, you have your hand up?
I did, but then I thought it's point of order. You asked for a seconder and then I got to talk.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to talk now, but yeah.
Look, let's have a seconder and then we will come back to questions and further discussions.
Okay.
Can we have someone second the motion?
Danielle, I'm happy to second.
Okay, Danielle would second the motion. Thank you. All right, let's open up for questions and further discussions. Daniel, you had your hand up, so
Yeah.
over to you.
I wanted to make a comment on behalf of the AU Patient Summary Project. One of the potential scopes for this February ballot was AU Patient Summary content. That's not ready. So the AU Patient Summary part of the ballot is not something that we'll be going forwards with. I just wanted to comment on that because I know there were 2 potential drivers. And AU Patient Summary was one of them.
So to clarify, that's the medications statement.
That's
terminology
right.
question. Yeah, cool.
Yes,
Right,
we
Richard,
would like to wait until that gets in the ballot for AU Patient Summary before we commit to, I guess, AU base and AU core content.
Richard, you have your hand up.
The provider directory work would like to have a profile of HSP-O available in a version of AU base that can be used. Now, they're not ready to do, we're not ready to do that right away. Can we have a draft for trial use or whatever it is, addition to AU base produced later in the year?
Snapshots can certainly be requested.
Yep.
So yeah, we might coordinate. We probably want to coordinate what goes in that snapshot and when. Because I don't really want to do snapshots for on demand because it's hard work. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, that might wind up including the stuff that Danielle was talking about if the timeframes work out. And then that might wind up getting a name 6.1, but it's not going to be the 6.1 that we were planning to produce in the next month.
Cool. And yeah, I think I think they go through the co-chairs and because that's like coordinating what publications are going to come out and what's going to be in them.
Yeah.
But certainly snapshots are possible. Yeah.
All right.
I just want to have that idea up and before the working group, because in a sense, when we talk about this in the future, we might call it 6.1, but there's some process that I think Brett understands by which this stuff can be done later.
All right. So coming back to the motion of withdrawing AU Base 6.1 from the upcoming ballot cycle. Any other questions, discussions, concerns? All right, I'm not hearing anything further, so I think it's time to call the questions. So Brett, can you please launch the voting mechanism? All right, the voting mechanism is up. Currently, we have 16 participants minus 1, which is me. So we have 15 who's eligible to vote. Is there anyone who not able to vote electronically on screen? Please put your vote into the chat.
Yeah, I'm +1 affirmative, Steve.
Okay, so we have 15 at the moment. We have 10 affirmative, 3 abstain on the screen, and 10 plus 1 means 11. So we have 11 affirmative, 3 abstains, and 0 negative. So therefore, motion carries.
Thanks.
All right. So that's that one done. Next one is item number 7 out 7, next step.
Yeah, so I just coming back to this again. I don't think we're going to do any work on it today. I just wanted to kind of go through some of the things we will need to do to prep for our R7 scoping. We have, and this is the job for the co-chairs, but there is a backlog of issues that need to have dispositions made and brought to the group or otherwise. And then we want to look at all of our outstanding items, outstanding issues we have in our backlog. So we do have a backlog of issues that have been raised. There are some that have been deferred through ballot. And with that, there's the chance to probably see there's a set that are now obsolete or not progressing. And I think we've done this before already in previous releases, but it would be good to clear the issues log with things, to have things that we intend to work on remaining. And there's also possibly the opportunity for new additions to be asked for, and we would want to do that via JIRA tickets directly. So I think timelines wise, we have to kind of work on how, obviously this is a discussion we can have in the work group, but also if we are requesting new material, new content additions, I kind of think we probably need to set a timeline as to when those could come in as backlog items along the way. And then eventually we have to get to writing a PSS. To kind of capture this. I've also got obvious need to support downstream IGs, so that's always a thing that we want to do constantly anyway. So there may be things we don't know yet that come into our R7 scope. Anyway, so any questions on any of that? Don't hear any. That's all right. So does anybody have any ideas on setting a timeline for kind of resolving this? I'm particularly interested in giving a period for people to really consider additions and support for additions. Go on, Dana.
Daniel.
I have a few, and I know we've got a bunch of the e-requesting people online who've also experienced this. So I think that we could pull together our experiences on that. Although I don't, hang on, just checking, you're not proposing that we somehow understand up front already everything that could be agreed and we work on that and we don't have additions come in as
No.
like time goes. Okay. So
No.
I suspect it's more that we would need to be clear on a content freeze point, and what some of the requirements are for being ballotable, and then kind of communicating to members of the community, including downstream projects, whether those are HL7AU projects or AFCP projects, that if they want a new edition, kind of here's sort of like the rough timeline of what it will take to like come and present a proposal and then get that content actually in as draft 0 and do like an AFMM1 evaluation and maybe some kind of connectathon or some evidence of kind of community engagement on it. So it might be more timelines almost around discrete pieces along with some clear kind of like this is the last date or the last meeting for which we could maybe approve AFMM1 for something and get it in or agree on an editorial change or something.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to do anyway, because that gives people something to work against. I think part of it is really prioritization questions about which things are we going to get into the committee and decisions made, and
So would the starting
things we
point
would move
be
forward?
would one of the starting point be looking into the backlogs and to determine sort of like what are in and what are out?
I think so. Yeah, a bit of a and obviously the co-chairs, like we can prep that and kind of give a position on a lot of those issues that are in the backlog. There's a number of issues that the committee hasn't looked at that were raised as non-ballot issues through the ballot period and things like that as well that we should probably look at and resolve in the work group. So there's kind of some obligation there to deal with some of those things. So I think we can probably bring that through. As I said, some of them are not explicit requests to change something. They're more like, I have a use case that's not being covered here. So we probably need to talk about those.
So would the next step be the co-chairs to go through the backlogs and then come up with a list and then to do broader community consultation?
Yeah, I think so. So I think an action on me would I can prep that discussion for the co-chairs and then we can. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So leave it at that.
We'll have that.
Can we also include whether the co-chairs do that or not? I think this has to. We have to send comms out, talking about scope inclusions and giving people enough notice and maybe asking for like a kind of like what we did last year, that some of that invitation to come to identify what people, if they know already, are interested to work through to get some picture of what's coming up, including from like AFCC projects or from like downstream HL7AU projects, as well as members of the community who have things that they would like to see happen in AU base.
Yeah, I think that would be useful. And I'm also thinking that in addition to the preps that the co-chairs done, the upcoming March meeting, which is only a few weeks away, we can also use that forum in the breakout sessions to have maybe more discussions. Would that be useful too?
I think that's a nice thing to do in a face-to-face.
Yeah, so I think that we have a kind of a multi-step approach. So one is for the co-chair preps to come up with a starter list, and then we can then have a broader community consultation through the mailing list, and also the face-to-face meeting in March. We have further discussions. The challenge is setting up a timeline.
Yeah, I think too there's a few. We have a few things I know from the eRequesting that I think are quite difficult, and I think we need to discuss how we would go about resolving those issues. Things like coverage, the billing code stuff, and things like that, which is kind of like we don't really have an answer on how we would even go forward on those things. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Then in that case, then we can assign the initial action item to you, Brett, if you're okay with that for the sort of discussions or preps or discussions at the upcoming co-chairs meeting. And then we can then take it from there with the follow-up plan of the email consultations, Zulip consultations, and also the face-to-face meeting consultations in March.
Cool. That's good.
All right. Great. Any other questions on agenda item number 7? If not, then it's my bad that I was pushing for the time things and I overlooked one action item, follow-up action item against agenda number 6. So given that we have voted to approve the withdrawal of AU base 611 from the current from the upcoming ballot, Brett, there needs to be an action item of emailing out for people who have signed up for the ballot to notify them that 611 is now withdrawn.
Yeah. I'll take this as a request to withdraw to the publication manager since I'm here.
Yep.
And I'll go and inform get the comms done and inform the board and do all the things I should do.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you. So that's taken care of. Number 8, we have about sort of less than 10 minutes left. So number 8.
Yeah, this is more of a status update anyway. So we have 1 quarter for the FHIR Work Group on the working group today on the 10th of March available to us. So I think that is the plan currently. So I think it'll be the first quarter of the day. And I'm still unsure about a hybrid facility at the venue at this point, but if we can't get one, I'll see what provisions can be made directly through with equipment. But so that's the current status of things. There will be an agenda for that, but we have not yet prepared one. So I might just leave that one as that.
Okay.
As an outline. Yep.
So to come back to Daniel's question earlier about a breakout sessions for the identifiers. Daniel, you want to pick up, or Brett, you want to pick up that conversation?
I guess that's item 9 now as part of the Connectathon.
Okay. All right, then in that case, then we move to item number 9, the Connectathon, and then the second bullet point is about the AU-based breakout. So we'll touch on that. All right, so Brett?
Yeah, so you can see that we do have a general breakout, which we've kind of, I guess, owned as the FHIR Work Group. But the IG authors hot topics session will run. So that's usually we do an update from Graham about IG Publisher and what's happening, things coming down the pipeline, and also a good chance for any authors to get together and discuss issues or questions. So that's definitely happening. And I guess then we need to list out other things. So I've heard there's a discussion to be had on identifier type.
So Richard, so can you then work with Brett and Daniel on the potential breakout, additional breakout sessions for the identified discussions?
Yep, I'll work with them on what we want to cover and what we want to produce? I think they're probably the two questions.
Yeah, I think so. Like normally, yeah, we have set up we'll get a slot confirmed about when it's going to happen, and usually we have a bit of material attached about things to read or think about for that session. But yeah, we can work on how to frame that. And any questions?
Probably create a wiki page under the Connectathon.
Yeah.
Because we normally have breakouts as part of tracks, we sort of do it as part of that, but because you're a little bit separate to a track, you probably need to
have your
own page.
Yeah, last time we had a blurb page, and you can always put extra pages in. Yeah. And we had some details for the breakouts.
Yeah, that's right. We have like one page for all breakouts, don't we?
Yeah. So you can happily put stuff under that for sure.
That might be enough for a blurb.
So on that point, when will the conference page up for the conference page for the March Connectathon be up?
That's a really good question.
It's up.
It's up. I don't think it's very populated yet.
Yeah, the breakout isn't, but the March Connectathon page, the title page is there. I was looking yesterday actually, and was very pleased to find it was already present.
Well, okay. Last week when I looked at it, it wasn't up, so I'm glad that it is up.
I think some links are missing, so it doesn't link to everywhere.
Can someone plonk a link to it in the chat?
Sure. I mean, it's in the Connectathon space. Like, it's in where all the Connectathons are. I'll just go find it now and link to it. I think people are already starting to build out content for it.
Yeah. I'm going to reorder those pages, and that work group page will have to change because it shouldn't live there. Anyway, that's fine. I'll work it out.
All right. I think a dog seems to want to contribute to the discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, I've popped the link in the chat. Oh, so is Brett. No?
Okay.
No? Oops, I did work group meeting. My bad. Okay, so that's there. I think Brett is doing some of the coordination for some stuff around schedules. I don't know how many breakout slots or anything, but so far, it looks like we've got one AU base. I think the other question is, are there any others? Because I know we didn't get to some of the work for AU eRequesting. If that's still a priority, we could use this Connectathon to do some of that content. I guess that's an option. I don't know if there's anything else that needs to be worked through for AU base that could use the Connectathon as an opportunity to do that. Oh well, maybe people email Brett if there's
any request. Yeah, if you have a breakout, they fill up pretty quick usually. So if you do have one, first get to pick their slot as well, because I think we'll have 4 slots on the first day of the Connectathon and 3 on the second. So there's only 7 slots to be had. We do have extra room, I think, though, so we can run concurrent breakouts if they're small. I can talk to you about those if you have other smaller groups that want to meet. We do have some small rooms available.
So has the ticket all be step up and no more extra tickets for anyone who might be interested?
I'm not sure about the status. I think it's so I don't know. Go to the link and try your luck, but and go on the events list. There's an email if you want to go on the waiting list, and if you do want to release your ticket because you can't make it, please let us know because that will free up a spot for someone else. If you're a co-chair or a track lead, let me know because I can probably finagle the ticket directly if it does sell out, if you have a role at the Connectathon, because I think there's a few on reserve for that purpose.
All right. Thank you, Brett. And thank you, everyone. We are at our time. The next meeting is already determined, which will be next week, same time. So the co-chairs will work through the draft agenda, and then we'll sort of publish the draft agenda sort of after next Monday, so co-chairs meeting. So that's about it for today. Any other follow-up questions that anyone wants to raise before we close the meeting? All right, if not, then Brett, can we stop the recording?